This is the section on tissues, and tissues consists of cells and the extracellular material and fluids around those cells. There are 4 different types of tissues: epithelial, connective, muscle, and neural. And we'll begin with epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is the most common type of tissue. Its cells are often, its cells act as a barrier. For example, our outer skin is epithelial tissue. It covers the body surface. It lines organs and passageways. It surrounds internal cavities and fluid-filled cavities, and it lines the inner surfaces of blood vessels and the heart. So basically it lines and covers. Epithelial tissue also forms glandular material, so it secretes. Connective tissue in general is very diverse. It has specialized cells and an extracellular matrix. The extracellular matrix is found only in connective tissue, and this matrix is made up of protein fibers and ground substance. Blood is connective tissue. It has a watery matrix called plasma. Bone has a solid matrix. Some of the functions of connective tissue is it fills internal spaces, provides structural support, and stores energy, such as in fat tissue or adipose tissue. Muscle tissue contracts, and the contraction is to allow for some movement. The movement may be to move the skeleton, or it may be to move internal products throughout the body. Muscle tissue also supports soft tissue. It maintains a good blood flow. It moves materials along internal passageways, and muscle tissue stabilizes our body temperature. There are 3 types of muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue is called skeletal because it's attached to our bones. Cardiac muscle tissue is found only in the heart, and smooth muscle tissue is in the walls of blood vessels, in glands, and along tracts. These different types of muscle cells do look different. The skeletal muscle cell is multinucleated. That is, it has many nuclei, and it's a very, very long cell. The cardiac muscle cell, it has a single nucleus per cell. It is branched, and it has these very strong connections called intercalated discs. Smooth muscle that lines our organs is spindle-shaped and has a single nucleus. It is not striated. That is, it is not striped. You'll notice the cardiac muscle tissue and the skeletal muscle tissue has these stripes called striations. Neural tissue has 2 types of cells, the neurons and neuroglia. Neuroglia can also be called glia or glial cells, and the neurons carry the message, and the neuroglia support the neurons. There are 2 different divisions of the nervous system: the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is everything outside of the brain and spinal cord. So here in this picture, this blue cell here is the neuron, and all these other cells are neuroglia. So we'll get back to some more detail on epithelial tissue. Remember, epithelial tissue covers surfaces and lines cavities and passageways. It also forms glands, so it secretes. And there's 2 different kinds of glands. Exocrine glands secrete through a tube or duct onto the external surface. For example, our sweat glands are exocrine glands. Endocrine glands secrete into the interstitial fluid. They do not secrete through a tube or duct. They just kind of ooze out of the cell into the interstitial fluid. An example of an endocrine gland would be the thyroid gland. So epithelial tissue includes epithelia and glands, and the glands are subdivided into exocrine, which secrete through a duct, and endocrine, which do not. Some more details on epithelial tissue function. Because epithelial tissue covers, it provides physical protection. It protects from abrasion, dehydration, damage. It controls what can cross through that tissue, so it controls permeability. And it contains specialized cells that detect changes in the environment, for example, touch receptors. So epithelial tissue provides sensation. And remember that epithelial tissue form glands to secrete. In describing a cell, you want to look at the so here is epithelial tissue, and let's say this is tissue that is lining our digestive tract. Well, the digestive tract has an opening, and the apical surface is the surface of the cell that is towards the opening. The basal surface is attached to the underlying tissue. You want to know that the opening that the apical surface faces is called a lumen, and the apical surface often has modifications for where it is in the body. For example, the modifications might be these microvilli, which increase the surface area in the intestinal tract for absorption, or cilia, which will move substances along the epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is divided or classified by shape as well as by layers. So there are three shapes. The first shape is flat, that is squamous. The second shape is cube-like, cuboidal. And the third shape is column-like, or columnar. You can see that each one of these has just one single layer of cells. Down below we see stratified epithelia. That is layered epithelia. So here's layered squamous. Now, in our skin, down at the base of the layers, the cells look cuboidal, but they flatten out as they come out to the surface, and they are not cuboidal, they are squamous. Here is layered cuboidal, and here is layered columnar. When there is a single layer, it is called simple. Epithelial tissue is avascular, that is, it does not have a good blood supply. And epithelial is going to be strongly attached to the cells next to it and below it, because it's the outer layer that needs strong attachment. So here at the basal surface, at the bottom of that epithelial cell, you will see what's called the basement membrane that attaches this epithelial cell to the underlying tissue. You will also find a variety of junctions, that is, connections between cells throughout epithelial tissue. Some of these junctions include tight junctions, gap junctions, and desmosomes. Tight junctions prevent the passage of water and solutes between the cells, and they also prevent the cell itself, the deeper part of the cell, from contact with the lumen, that is, that opening at the apical surface. Tight junctions are found in the digestive tract, so our digestive enzymes do not pass through the cells. An adhesion belt attaches, it's just below the surface of the cell, and it's attaching the cytoskeleton by this band of membrane proteins. Gap junctions do what they say. They allow a gap. That is, they allow for one cell to communicate with another cell. And communication is the passage of small molecules or ions from one cell to the next. You can see the gaps here. Desmosomes lock the cells together very firmly. For example, you may have had a sunburn in the past where you peeled those layers of skin off. Those layers, those cells were layered because each cell is attached by a desmosome to the nearby cell. So they form very, very tight layers. So we need to talk about the different types of epithelium, and we'll start with simple squamous, one layer of flat cells. In lab, you scratched with a toothpick some of your cells that lined your cheek. When they were in your cheek, they looked like this, all attached together with those desmosomes, but by scratching with a toothpick, you're separating the cells and allowing them to be free of the neighboring cells. So these cells are fairly thin and flat. Sometimes these cells are really quite delicate because it's just a single layer of flat cells. So it's going to be in regions where there is absorption or diffusion, for example, inside of our lungs, as oxygen diffuses from the air sacs into our blood, it passes across simple squamous epithelium. Our capillary walls are one cell thick of simple squamous epithelium. Stratified squamous, a common example is our skin, or lining our mouth. Now, in this skin, it is the cells are flattened and have died on the outer surface. They're filled with keratin. Here, the cells are moist. It forms mucous membrane. So these cells are all living. So our skin is keratinized. And the non-keratinized stratified squamous is in areas of the body that are lined with mucous membrane, that pink material, for example, lining the oral cavity, the nose, the esophagus, the anus, and vagina. Keratin is a waterproofing protein that fills the cells in the outer layer of our skin. Simple cuboidal look like a string of beads, and an example of where they exist is in the kidneys. Stratified cuboidal is found in our sweat glands. It's many layers, in this case 2 or 3 layers of cuboidal cells. Transitional epithelium is difficult to identify, but it stretches, so it's found in the urinary system. So here it is relaxed, and the cells can stretch out as the bladder fills. Transitional epithelium stretches. Columnar epithelium, the cells are tall. Simple columnar is found in the intestines, and they may have microvilli or cilia. So here we have microvilli. This would be in the digestive tract. The cilia would be pseudostratified columnar in the trachea.